Good evening and welcome to our panel on district leadership in times of extended chaos, hosted by the University of Texas at Arlington's Center for Educational Research, Policy, and Practice. My name is Colin Yoxall, the College Communications Specialist. Tonight's session is the last of 4 panels this year that have explored topics surrounding our challenges throughout the past 13 tumultuous months. This session is being recorded and will be moderated by Dr. Catherine Robert. Here to welcome us with opening remarks is the chair of the Department of Educational Leadership and Policy Studies, Dr. Marilee Breshani Ludwig. Dr. Ludwig.
Thank you, Colin, and thank you so much for all that you do to keep these events organized. And same to you, Tatiana and Dr. Robert. Thank you for your leadership in making this all possible. So grateful. And I know that you'll plan to introduce our panelists for this evening, so I just want to welcome them as well in deep gratitude, knowing that you are incredibly busy and that you're giving of your time to talk about such important matters as we're discussing this evening. I welcome all of you joining us, and as you're joining us, so grateful to have you participate in this interactive panel session where we are posing questions. The whole idea of these panel sessions and what the center is doing at in the Educational Leadership and Policy Studies Department at the University of Texas Arlington is to really host conversations where we can apply research to practice to resolve real world challenges and to think forward to what does education look like now? What do we need to be doing differently? And what do we need to be doing better? So it's with that I welcome you and am so grateful to be a part of this evening. Dr. Robert.
Thank you, Dr. Ludwig. And we appreciate your quick engagement in ELP's leadership and willingness to move cross-country to be here with us this year. As you've no doubt found, leadership during a pandemic is quite an experience. In fact, Robert E. Hall noted in the Dallas Morning News last week in his summary of the events of 2020, a global pandemic eliminated group gathering, moved workers from their offices to homes, restructured and all but eliminated in-person interaction, and of course, made toilet paper seem more valuable than paper money. We experienced a contested presidential election, a defining racial event in the death of George Floyd, and a 100-year Arctic blast with massive and extended power outages. If you are not awed by the impossible feats that organizations nevertheless made possible, you are not paying attention. So hats off to our superintendents. Those of us engaged in the study of leadership have definitely been paying attention to the outrageous and seemingly insurmountable hurdles our superintendents have all faced. With me tonight are 3 school superintendents who are still standing in spite of last year. Dr. Jeannie Stone serves in Richardson ISD. Dr. Jeremy Thompson represents Ponder ISD. And last but not least, Ms. Linda Ellis joins us from Grand Prairie ISD. Panelists, thank you for joining us this evening. Your work is critical for students and staff, and you can see from our attendees how much we value your thoughts. We have graduate students, teacher candidates, professors, and administrators in both higher education and K-12 with us tonight. Our panelists will answer a few questions from me, and we will save time at the end for questions that guests have entered into the chat. Our previous sessions this year have covered innovative responses and continuing needs as a result of the pandemic. Tonight, however, we're turning to the more personal aspects of your leadership experiences and how this year has impacted your perspective on leadership. With that said, let's first start at the beginning of your leadership experiences. Our principal trainees in their internship experiences are surprised and often fearful of the immense feeling of responsibility they have when taking on intern duties. Dr. Stone, do you remember the first time you held the proverbial walkie-talkie as an intern?
Gosh, well, first of all, that was about 25 years ago. And, but yeah, I do remember it. I can remember that time really like it was yesterday. I was coming out of the classroom and training. I was actually in the classroom when I was an intern, but I can remember during that time of being an intern and then moving into my first assistant principal job, just the fear about how much I would miss the classroom. I think that's probably the overwhelming thing for me that I really reflect back on and think about that, because I loved teaching so much. I felt that I felt I was really good at it by the time I had gotten 6 years under my belt, and then I was going to start over with something brand new. And so for me, that's something I associate with that. I also, just the unknown. It's funny now, 25 years ago, I really didn't know anything. Experience is your very best friend. And so going into my first intern job, that was really the first time I'm making a whole new level of decisions, and without any kind of experience. And so my advice I always give to young interns, young, administrator, is to never, ever be afraid to ask questions, and to never think you have to solve everything by yourself. Hopefully any administrator has a really good sense of judgment about what the right decision is, but you can always use those around you to help collaborate on decisions. No decision has to be made immediately on the spot. You can always check your gut, especially until it becomes an experience that drives you and you can rely back on that. And don't be afraid to collaborate with those who are there to work as a team with you. You don't have to make every decision on your own.
Great, thank you. Dr. Thompson, what about you? What motivated you to become an administrator, and what was your first role what you expected it would be?
So again, like Dr. Stone, it's been more than 20 years ago that I stepped into that role. And to be quite honest, I kind of came into administration through the back door. I was not certified or trained up. There was no internship. I stepped into that role, and I left the classroom too soon as well. Still have been fighting to get back and be a teacher every chance I get. But I stepped into the role of a secondary principal, grades 6 through 12 in a rural district in the middle of crisis, different than COVID, but basically didn't really know what I was stepping into exactly, wasn't certified. I'm a product of alternative certification actually all the way through. And probably if I'd have known what I was stepping into initially, I might have been much more reluctant to step out of the classroom and into it. And I don't say that as a discouragement, it just wasn't, I was not prepared. And so I think it speaks highly of programs like UTAs and others that do a good job preparing interns to at least have some expectation. Although this year probably is proof that we joke about it in the administrative world all the time about things that we didn't learn in school. There was no how to deal with COVID-19 in any of my preparation training. So my first years were in the middle of financial exigency. And so really my first 2 years were extremely difficult, and going through them was really challenging. But looking back, I learned a lot in a very short period of time. And I think it's relevant to this year also, that leadership through crisis, that's when people really can see kind of who you are, and when you find out who you are. And it also is a way to build trust quickly. If the seas are calm, people don't really know what kind of leader you are. And so while it's challenging to go through crisis, it's really what defines who you are as a leader. And I will second what Dr. Stone has said. I would not have survived without the benefit of some great mentors and colleagues. They might not have known they were mentors and colleagues to me at the time, but I answered a lot of questions my first couple of years. As a teacher would come up and ask me a question about something, I got really good at saying, well, I was thinking about that. I need one more night to sleep on that because I'm just really not sure what I want to do yet. And so I would send them off, and I would immediately go call somebody and say, have you heard of this? And do you have a form I can steal and make my own? And then I would come back the next morning and say, here's what I've decided, and here's the form we're going to use in the process. And so I faked my way through a lot of stuff thanks to the benefit of some great mentors and colleagues. And so I really encourage those that I reach out to now to build that network and to not be hesitant. It was true as a principal. It's definitely true as a superintendent, regardless of the size of district. People in the business know what you're going through, and we're happy to help. We all have opinions, and people will take off work to come tell us we're doing a bad job. And so most of the time when people are calling me, it's to complain about something. So if somebody calls to ask my opinion about something or ask for help, it's a welcome respite from the other phone calls. And so we're very happy to share. We don't survive global pandemics by ourselves. And I think this year it's been evident there. And so looking back, those first couple of years really prepared me to deal with whatever may come. But I would have been much better off had I been an intern and had I gone through the process before I stepped into the chair, as opposed to trying to wing it and learn on the fly. But there's a lot of things, even those of you who are going through and learning how to be administrators in a pandemic year, there's still going to be things that you encounter when you get to sit on the other side of the desk that you haven't had experience with, you're not prepared for. And so you've got colleagues and mentors to reach out to, and experience is definitely the best teacher too.
All right, thank you. Yeah, and we'll get to towards the end. We'll talk more about how much you superintendents have worked together this year and how impressive that's been. Ms. Ellis, how did your first leadership experience go? Did it feel like people were depending on you at first, or did it feel like you were managing a lot of tasks and handling student discipline?
Well, there certainly are a lot of tasks. Like Dr. Stone and Dr. Thompson, this was well over 20 years for me as well, but I do remember that first experience. And I actually became an administrative intern mid-year. So I came in January. And the way our internship worked is you work 3 days at one campus, 2 days at another campus. So you were learning from different principals. And everything really is experiential. You just build this repertoire of things that you've experienced, and you call on that as you make your decisions and that sort of thing. But I remember my very first day, an office referral came in from 2 kids that had been fighting in the bathroom. And so I got the referral and I went into the principal and said, I just got this office referral for kids fighting in the bathroom. And he looked at me and he said, and that's why I have you. And so I did what's already been mentioned. I went back in my office and I started calling people that I knew, assistant principals, and asking for help. On the other hand, when I went to the other school that I worked at periodically, I got an office referral. It was over something like, I don't know, name calling or something like that. And I went into the principal and just said, just letting you know, I've got this discipline referral, but I've got this. And she goes, no, you don't have it. What I'd like to do is model for you how I would like for you to handle a discipline referral. And so you learn all kinds of things. And I think that from the advice I would give is that, it's always smart to plan your work, but as an administrator, you don't always get to work your plan. So you just got to kind of plan on that. Many of the things that you plan for your work happen after hours. So.
Yeah, we do the real work once everybody leaves, right? Dr. Stone, after that first entry into an administrator role, how did your feelings about leadership evolve as you became principal of a campus and then moved to central office?
So after I left the classroom and I moved into assistant principal, I loved that job because I loved supporting teachers and building connections. And so the next chapter of that story is about how, even though I was reticent about leaving the classroom, I love the assistant principal position. Well, then when I moved to principal position, I love that. And then, then I had the opportunity to go to central office, and I love that. And I use this illustration a lot in my own district, because when I first came to Richardson and I was being introduced at the time as deputy superintendent, and then became superintendent just a year later, I was introducing myself when I was first meeting the staff, and I said, I started out as a teacher, and then I moved up to assistant principal, and then I moved up to principal, and then I was central office, and then I was assistant superintendent, deputy superintendent, and then here I am, superintendent. And something happened in my head, like, no, that's not how you serve. You didn't move up to the top. It's really the very opposite. And so now I truly do lead and try to build a culture for all of our leaders that we're at the bottom, and we're supporting everyone that is above us, all the way up to the classroom teacher who's at the top. And that's truly the culture I want in our school district, because the teachers, I feel, have the hardest jobs. I mean, they work with hundreds of students, and there where the learning happens. And so that's really, anyone who works with me knows that is my philosophy for leadership. And that's what I expect also from anyone who is supporting teachers. I believe our jobs exist in support of teachers. And so I see that like I'm at the bottom looking up, because if I'm at the top looking down, I am in fact looking down. And so I've worked in environments before where that was kind of the culture of leadership, where things were pushed down from central office. And that's what it felt like to teachers, that everything's being pushed down without acknowledgement of still what it's like to be in the classroom and how hard that job can be. So that's really how now, if I want to look back on that progression of all the positions I've had, it really is, I was able to just really move down, 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 down with each position, having just more of an impact and influence to support those whom I serve, with students then being at the very, very top of that inverted triangle where they should be.
Yeah, definitely. I learned to look to see what was going on that day, whether it was star testing or, field day on an elementary campus, before calling, when I was at a central office job, before asking a school or a campus to do anything, for sure. Good point. So Dr. Thompson, and as you moved up or moved through or down in leadership roles, as Dr. Stone said, and you spent more time with community stakeholders as a result, what was the biggest change in your leadership perspective?
So I would amen what Dr. Stone has said, and I think the challenge for me, and probably for all of us, you hear our hearts, we're teachers at heart, and you move up for whatever reason or move down for whatever reason, but the joy that you experience as a teacher of the light bulb coming on in math class, or for me as an old coach, of the relationships you have with kids, that's what drew us. This is a calling, right? It's not just a job. If it's just a job, it's going to be a miserable job for you. It's a calling. And so the calling is to do right by kids. And I think for me, the biggest challenge in that transition into leadership roles was to not lose sight of why I got in the calling in the first place. And I think the farther away you move from kids, the easier it is to forget that it's not just about checking off my list of things to do today. And the challenge as you deal with community stakeholders in particular is a lot of the decisions we make, especially the further down the chain you go or up, however you look at it, we don't get to really share a lot of the reasons behind why we make the decisions we make. And now even more so than when I first dove into this, there's people have platforms to share their opinions to the world now about their thoughts on what we should have done and how we should have done things differently. And we don't really get to always tell our story. And so for me, my perspective has had to be really hyper focused on, and this is cliche, but it's cliche for a reason. It's about what's doing right for kids. Because I have to be able to wake up every morning and look in the mirror and feel like, or maybe before I go to bed at night so I can sleep, and know that what I did today, even though it might be questioned or it might be even not the best decision, but it was done with a heart that was best for kids. And again, that's cliche, but it's cliche for a reason. And so as you move up and you're dealing with less of the cool experiences of light bulbs coming on with kids and the relationships and the high fives on the field or whatever it may be, those things that drew us to the calling in the first place, got to focus back on that and to realize that those stakeholders, those community stakeholders, often the loudest ones, they're passionate because they're passionate about their own children. They're passionate about their school district. And so I try to at least give them the benefit of the doubt that we're all trying to get to the same end. They may not have the same information I have, and they certainly don't carry the same responsibility that we carry as campus and district leaders. But if I talk about this with board, and I talk about this with my administrative staff, it all does come back to, if we're making decisions that are in the best interest of the kids, in the same way we did when we were classroom teachers or coaches, then at the end of the day, we can sleep well at night and we can live with ourselves, because that's what our motivation is. And I believe that's true of most of our community stakeholders also. It's very frustrating in this day and age because everybody has opinions and they all get to share them. And then I have staff who come and, I don't want to know everybody's opinion, but they'll come and share with me what's going on Facebook or whatever. And it's hard to not be torn by those community stakeholders. But generally, I try to believe that their passion is for the same reason that I'm passionate. They're just maybe, we're sometimes tugging against each other. But I think that the solution to that is good communication. And I don't want to get too far ahead of you, but I think if we don't tell our story, then people are going to fill in their own story, and it's always going to be the worst case scenario. And so I've really tried to channel that passion from community stakeholders by giving them our story first. And that's certainly been true in this year as well. And so when people understand our heart, and I can speak for both of my colleagues on the panel, I've heard their heart for kids. When people know we're in it for their kids, and if their kids love going to school where they're at, if they know our heart is for kids, they're going to give us grace even when we mess up. And they're going to give us the benefit of the doubt by and large. Some won't. But if we're not communicating why we're in this calling in the first place, then they're definitely going to question our leadership. So I think it's a matter of channeling the passion of our community stakeholders and participants and those that work for us to know where our heart is and what's guiding our decision making. And we have to communicate that well.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. So, Ms. Ellis, Grand Prairie experienced an unexpected loss of a leader. What type of leadership did the community need after that loss? And how about the staff?
Okay, well, first, I think it was in visiting with the Board of Trustees, the continuity of programming to begin with. Dr. Hull did many things for many years. She was in the district for 12 years, and she was a leader with vision. And so one of the things that I think was important is just that continuity and the sustainability through grief. And quite frankly, I was managing my own grief through all of it. I'd worked with Dr. Hull for 12 years and was at that time was Deputy Superintendent of Teaching and Learning. And so I knew a lot about what was Dr. Hull's expectations. I knew a lot about what her expectations would be from me moving forward. And I still remember, that was in July, and then in August we had our convocation, and part of that with the staff was actually going through the grief and celebrating the accomplishments and the things that Dr. Hull had done for this community. But the biggest part was simply providing somewhat of a buffer to allow people to go through the grief and to understand that the district, the things that were happening in the district and the things that she brought to this district were going to continue. That was the immediate need. And I think the other part is just allowing the staff to show their grief and to move forward.
Yeah, it's rough. So finally, we come to 2020. Dr. Stone, did you find that you shifted leadership behaviors last year to meet new needs?
Oh, 2020. 2021. I don't think you'll find any superintendent that would disagree that this has been one of, if not the most challenging year in our careers. Mainly because, this is my 31st year in education. And before that, I knew public education because I'm a product of it. And so I know how public education works. I know that you start the school year in August and it's very cyclical, and you just know. And after doing it for 30 years, you know how to do that, right? And everyone knows pretty much how school works until it doesn't, until you have to recreate school. And I think there's a lot to that because everyone, your parents, your students, your teachers, the community, everyone knows how school works. When you are inventing something new, literally every single day, you are crafting a new way to do something. You are actually protecting people from, something that could kill them. You are battling a deadly virus. You are also, there's just the list could go on and on and on. There will be scrutiny then on every decision of everyone thinking that maybe that's not the best way to do it. And so for early on in the trying to, we called it a blueprint, which was our document of exactly how every single thing that would happen. And it's all different. We try to base everything on science and the CDC in terms of our mitigation, risk protocols and all of that, but then all the routines and all of the things that we were going to do all had to be created. And I had to learn early on that 50% of those 50% of everyone, let's just say everyone, would think it was the right thing to do, and 50% of the people would think it was the wrong thing to do. And I've never ever encountered that. I think that's one of the biggest things that I really had to really learn to just accept that was the way it was going to be, because I want everyone to be on board. You know, I'm a big person that I believe that I can, you know, with enough explaining, like Dr. Thompson said, with enough communication as to the why behind a decision, that I can get people to understand. Maybe they might not agree, but they'll at least respect it. Until this year, when you've got people that don't believe that the virus exists, and so they don't think that there should be any of the protocols and things that we're doing. They don't believe, when we have anti-maskers that don't believe, even till last night at our board meeting, don't believe that we should be wearing masks. And it really has been a challenge to balance out. I know whatever decision I'm going to make, 50% are going to agree with it and 50% are not. And I have to be okay with that, which is why that judgment and that collaboration and having different voices at the table has been critical, because, and you know, and a supportive school board, because we have 50% and 50%, and it most of the time has been that way. You've got to have a lot of people that are in your ear, and that, you know, you're all together at least collaborating on decisions, because you're going to get a lot of disagreement. And I think that that's been one of the things that's been the biggest challenge for me personally, is just knowing the number of people that aren't going to be supportive for all of the many reasons that I've kind of just described.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Dr. Rasco mentioned that last month. I think he said 20% will strongly feel one way, 20% will feel strongly another, and the rest were kind of in between, and it depended on which decision it was. So for all of you, and we'll start with Dr. Thompson, after your experience over the last year, what do you think an educational leader provides to students, staff, and community? And is that different during a crisis?
So I want to piggyback off of something Dr. Stone said, and then I'll kind of answer your question if I can. So as I came into administration, certainly as I moved up into the superintendency, and I'm going to use the moved up in this scenario because the analogy works better.
Okay.
The farther you move up the mountain, my mentor told me, he said it's lonely, man. He said you gotta find people. He said your board members are not going to understand. People are not going to get it. Your spouse comes maybe as close to understanding, but they also don't know what it's like on the other side of the desk. And the further you climb the mountain, the thinner the air gets, the less people there are up there. The grass is not green up there like it is down in the valley. You're kind of on an island in a way. And so I think one of the things I've seen this year amongst leaders is really a sense of more camaraderie. I've seen it across the board, but especially amongst the people at the top who are in the know, who've answered honestly for maybe the first time amongst colleagues, the question, how you doing? And people have been honest about that maybe for the first time. And some days it's not very good. And so I want you guys to know, as you move to the other side of the desk, whatever level that is, it gets more and more lonely, and you've got to find people who understand what that's like, so that you have some empathy there. And so I think that's true in any time, but I think in times of crisis, and certainly this year, whatever the crisis is, this is not the last one. It's a big one, and it's definitely been long lasting, but what it creates is a sense of unknown for everyone. And to second what Dr. Stone said, virtually every survey we've sent out has been inconclusive. 40% yes, 40% no, 20% we don't know, but whatever you decide is going to be wrong. And so you don't have a clear-cut, mandate from the people, the stakeholders, because they don't really know either, and they change on a whim depending on what day you ask them. And so in the unknown, people go nuts and buy way too much toilet paper, and they make rash decisions. And so I think what I have learned through this year is the importance of our job, and the weight of the job as campus and district leaders is people need an anchor that they can trust. So for me personally this year, I've joined Dr. Ludwig in switching places. So I was in ERA, which is a 2A district northwest of DFW, was in the district for 23 years, 16 as superintendent. And so I started off the pandemic in a district where I had been there for a long time. The relationships were solid. trust had been established, and it really served us well as we entered into the pandemic because people gave us the benefit of the doubt because they knew us. And by us, I mean our administrative team and school district. And so there was a lot of trust given. In January, I moved to Ponder. And so in the midst of crisis and moving after 20 years and all of those other things on top of moving into a place where all of my comfortable ruts were gone and nobody really knew me. And so I'm starting from scratch. And so that's added another layer for me in the midst of deciding whether or not to mask or to not mask. I knew my former community well. I don't know this community. Fortunately, nobody knows what they think here anyway. So, you know, whatever we decide is what we decide. So I think that it really became paramount or evident to me this year, the importance of us as leaders being an anchor that people can trust. And you can't wait till there's a crisis to develop relationships of trust with community people and staff and all of that. And I think, again, it comes back to communication and being transparent and sometimes being vulnerable too, which is hard for us as leaders who feel like we always have to know all the answers. And so again, for me, it really became clear as in the summer last year, were communicating out to folks, and it was out of my comfort zone, but we moved beyond regular emails and newsletters and that sort of stuff to video announcements because I felt like people needed to see the human side of leadership. And probably I didn't really realize it first, but probably because I looked pretty rough at times, it engendered a little sympathy for us at the top too, to go, okay, this guy didn't look very good, you know, whatever, tired, weary. And what I realized is that I did a video about July 4th. I was actually on vacation. I did it from vacation. It was evident. I was at a beach location and I was making a video that went out. And basically it was probably 7 or 8 minutes of, we don't really know. We're working on it. We're going to let you know. At the end of 8 minutes, you knew nothing really more than you did when you started, except that we were still on the job. We were still taking care of kids. We don't know, but as soon as we know, we're going to let you know. And I had a really positive feedback to that video, even though I answered 0 questions, because we were communicating and we were human and we were transparent. And it was an anchor saying, hey, we haven't forgotten about you. We're still here. We're not leaving you hanging. We'll tell you as soon as we know something, and we're working 24/7 to do what's right by kids. Even though you're going to disagree with it when we make the decision, we're doing it in the best interest of kids. And I think it engendered some trust amongst our community stakeholders and our teachers to know that even though we still don't know anything, they're still working on it. They're not leaving us hanging. And so I think even when the answer sometimes is, I don't know, it can't always be, I don't know. Sometimes we have to know something and we have to say it assertively, even if we're not sure that's the right answer. And again, if it's in the best interest of kids, as far as we can tell, it's going to work out fine. But I think we have to communicate that story out, and people have to see that we are human. We're not just robotically making decisions on, from central office and pushing them down, whether you like them or don't, that we're human, we care, and we're here for kids. And so I think that communication and the human side of that, a little bit of vulnerability, but still being an anchor that people can trust is paramount all times, but certainly in times of crisis. And ultimately it boils down to whether it's our teachers, our kids, as superintendent, I don't always, and I'm in a new district, I don't even know the kids yet, but there needs to be a sense that we as leaders care about people. And I think if people perceive that we as leaders care, even if you're in Grand Prairie or Richardson ISD, if they feel like you care about kids, then they're going to tend to give you the benefit of the doubt. And you have to communicate that message because it's going to continually be questioned. Sometimes we're going to make the wrong decision, or sometimes it's a decision people don't like. But if we care about people, or our teachers know and our staff know we care about them, and it goes back to the inverted pyramid, you can't just preach servant leadership and not do it. You have to be the bottom of that. And we're, as one of my staff says, we're in the good hands people business. We're here to take care of teachers who are in the trenches doing the real work. And people know if you care. I mean, it's a cliche again, people don't care what you know, they unless they know that you care. And it's a cliche for a reason. And if you don't really care about people, and this is not a calling for you, you need to find a different job, because it's often a thankless job. When you move to the other side of the desk, or we refer to it sometimes as the dark side, you have to stay focused on what brought you to the calling in the first place. And you have to communicate out the fact that you care. And it's not going to come from emails you send out. It's going to become from standing side by side with people in the trenches sometimes and doing the work with them where you can. And so I think that if we're guided by that, I think that was really, really important for me through this past year, and it's something I'll take with me, hopefully out of this pandemic soon into the next one that comes along. I have quit saying it can't get any worse, because I think I'm just messing it up for next month. So
yeah, don't say that again. Yeah, I kept thinking of y'all because every vacation, every holiday for the last year, that something would come up, you know, and I think, oh, there goes their family dinner or whatever. I knew that it was impacting y'all's personal lives quite a bit. So Miss Ellis, how about you? So the question was, over the last year, what do you think an educational leader provides to students, staff, and the community? And has it been different during the crisis?
Well, if I'm being totally honest, I can't talk about how it is different during crisis because the entire time I've been in this role, there has been crisis. It went from the death of Dr. Hull to COVID, and then, you know, the winter storm that we had. And Dr. Stone, when you talked about, you know, 50% of the people are going to agree and 50% of the people are going to disagree, that couldn't be more true. Even over something like during the winter storm, like people were saying, the schools should all turn off all their power to save the power grid. And at the same time, you're understanding that, well, that is going to provide more damage for our buildings and that sort of thing. So the simplest of things become difficult in crisis, but I don't think your leadership changes. I do think your leadership is under a magnifying glass. And I just feel like it's the things that got you into leadership to begin with, the things that you've learned through your classes, through your training, through your experiences. And that is, you build trust. You build trust with everybody that you can. You make your decisions based on the experiences that you've had, understanding that safety and security and student outcomes are where you're coming from. And I had a leader that I worked for, and he used an expression with me more times than I probably was comfortable with. And that was, you can communicate 9 times 9 ways. And I can't tell you how many times I've fallen back on that and said, yeah, you've got to communicate it 9 times 9 ways. And the bigger part is to be transparent. If you don't know, say you don't know. And the other part is, I have learned that during crisis, and again, I've not been a superintendent when there wasn't crisis, but I can tell you, relying on people and relying on the people that have experiences and understanding that we are all in it to make the right decision. And we're doing all that we can to, number one, keep people safe and secure. And number two, make it to where there is some sort of, again, continuity about what schools should be for children and for families. Because it's not all about academics. It's all the other things that decisions were being made about feeding families and about so many things. It has been, I don't know how else to describe it except simply a whirlwind. And so you have to have thick skin, and you have to, at the end of the day, and I appreciate you saying this, Dr. Thompson, at the end of the day, you got to be able to say, did you make the right decision for children and for families in the community? If you do that, and if you do that consistently, even when people disagree with you, they will follow, they will conform. And I've just said so many times, I never dreamed that in this role, there could never be a decision that people just agreed with. It just has not happened. But you stay true to the strengths of, the systemic strengths in the organization. You call on that. And so I guess the short answer, I don't think your leadership changes. Your leadership's always going to come out. But you do step up in crisis. But who you are is who you are, and your values and the mission stays true.
Thank you. Yeah, I like that. Before we open up for student questions, I'll ask one that was submitted early by student Jennifer Kim. She asks about the many incidents of racially motivated attacks and the increased calls for equity in education. How do you build a team that helps you address diversity within your school district? And I'll let y'all, whoever wants to go first, can jump in.
Yeah, I'll start. I think, and if you know, or if you really get to know a lot about Richardson ISD, you'll learn that we've been working on equity, toward equity. We really began the work back in 2017, and we adopted an equity policy in June of 2019, and we have in 2018, I became superintendent in 2017, but in 2018 created our Department of Equity, Diversity, Inclusion. We have several staff members in there. There's been a lot of work, a lot of growth in our district toward equity. And it's really been driven by our equity policy. And we're working now to move our equity policy from words to action, which is really the hardest part. But back this summer, when, with the murder of George Floyd, that was a huge, huge time, I think, in a reckoning or awakening of a lot of people in a lot of different ways. And there were a lot of statements that came out from organizations, big statements about, in fact, Richardson ISD, we put one out the very next day about our commitment to dismantling systemic racism. When this school year began, and I knew that we could easily start the school year and just focus in on managing the pandemic. And it would be really easy to leave that big statement and the work and make it, it would be so easy. And I've seen a lot of organizations that have done that, have not necessarily followed through on that statement that was made about that event. We started the school year with the analogy of there are two bricks that we're holding on to and carrying in terms of our work. And one of them is managing the pandemic, and the other one is managing the systemic racism that exists in our district. And so inherent within that is the acknowledgement that it exists. And we had made that years prior. So we have a lot of work that is going on right now from our Department of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, but also it's really starting to permeate the classrooms and the cultures of the school districts. And we do a lot of things. There's a requirement of a certain number of hours of cultural literacy training that every employee has to take every year. But I think the biggest thing is that, and I'll kind of stop with this, is that if you say dismantling systemic racism, and that was the commitment that we made as a district, that we will dismantle, we will acknowledge, and which we did, and then we will start to dismantle it. Well, that's the hardest part. Because when you say dismantling systemic racism, it seems like this huge, big thing to tackle. I'm like, I can't cure the world of systemic racism. I wish I could, but I can't. But what I can do is think about, I own the system of Richardson ISD as its leader. This is my system. I'm not talking about the whole world. I'm talking about my system. So what in my system is broken that is producing outcomes that are disproportionate? There's always been an achievement gap in this district, in this state, in this country, where white kids are at the top, there is a gap, and kids of color are down below. It is always been there. It's almost as if we expect it. Something's broken there. There's all kinds of other disproportionate data. We're looking at that, and we are taking it apart. We are dismantling things. We know, for example, here's a real quick example. We have, back in 2017, 4% of our students of color were qualifying for gifted and talented, as opposed to 10% of our white population. Something's broken there. We took that apart. We found out that it was all in identifying ways that we were identifying kids. We put it back together with some different ways to identify kids, and now we are over 9% for our kids of color. It's simply about seeing what's broke. It's not about systemic racism. It's about what in our system is producing outcomes that are disproportionate for kids of color. We take them apart, we fix the broken piece, we put it back together, we will get outcomes. We have to see it that way. And that is the work we're doing. I can give you examples after example after example of what we are doing to double our kids of color who are taking Algebra 1 in the 8th grade. I could go on and on, but I won't. But that's what we have to do as leaders to see, are we willing to accept these race-based outcomes? Because that's what they are. If we're not, the only way to change that is to dismantle our practices and our system if we want to get different outcomes. And I'm really passionate about this. And the work that we are doing is starting to move the needle to close some of those gaps, but it has to be done piece by piece acknowledging what's broken in the system to make sure that we truly are going to move the needle like we said we were going to this summer or whenever it was said.
Excellent, thank you. Who wants to go next?
I'll jump in, and I'm going to give kudos to Dr. Stone as well. And I don't know if it's still publicly available, but she had a great session at TAS. I think it was midwinter. Super inspirational for me, Dr. Stone, and you'll get all the details there and the passion behind that, additional stories there of what she's doing in Richardson ISD. I'm in a much smaller district, and so I'm going to take maybe a different tone on it. I think data does inform it, but I think we have to, first of all, as we talked about with servant leadership, we have to look at ourselves first as leaders. And so as she was talking, I'm thinking about an old metaphor maybe, or, how to eat an elephant, one bite at a time. So whether it's systemic racism or whatever problems exist in public education, and there's a bunch of them out there that are huge. And if you allow yourself to be overcome by the gravity of trying to fix that, it is overwhelming, and not just systemic racism, but that's a big one. I think that we as leaders, whether it's campus leaders or superintendents, we have control over our area. So I have to look at my school district and realize this is where I have a modicum of control. And I realized in 2020, I really am not in control of anything, but I can influence my world. And so first of all, I have to make sure that myself as a leader, that I'm acknowledging my own biases. I like to think I don't have them, but what I've done for me personally as a leader is reached out to my friends, my colleagues of color, especially my kids that have less so in my current district, but I had a lot of access to kids in my smaller district. And I talk to kids, and I talk to my colleagues who have experienced it, because I haven't. And so I really have asked some difficult questions of them, and they have been, it's amazing what happens. This is true about any stakeholder of any color. People have stories to tell, and if we will ask and care about the answers, they will tell us. It has to be relationships of trust, and there has to be an environment where vulnerability is allowed and accepted and held sacred. But for me, it was a matter of going, okay, hey, I think I have a grasp on this, but do I really? And so I've really, for me personally, as a leader, reached out to people of color who are in leadership positions, who are students in my district, who are teachers in my district, to get their perspectives, number one, before I go solving a problem that either doesn't exist or trying to fix a problem with the wrong tool. And then second of all, I think that true with servant leadership, true in regards to dismantling biases of any kind, but certainly in regards to this topic, is it has to be who we are. Again, cliche, but our teams and our staff and our choices have to be reflective of the acknowledgement that this is important to us. We all have the same 24 hours in the day, and we're going to choose to do what's important. And so if it's important, it's going to be something that's made a priority. And again, kudos to Dr. Stone, because she's made it a priority. In the midst of crisis, do we set these things down? Because it'd be easy to do so. What we choose as leaders to be priority is what will be priority in our district. And so if we expect it to change, it has to change. And I'm going to go back with Dr. Stone's. It has to change at the bottom with us as superintendents, at the foundation. Because if it's not important to us, instructional, academic leadership, all of that starts with you as the leader at the district level, at the campus level. And so we can give lip service to it all day long, but if it's not something that's a priority to me, that translates out to the way that I hire staff and the things we do when we gather as a staff. If it's not priority to me, it's not going to be priority to the district. And so you have a limited number of those cards to play. And so you have to decide what's priority to you as a leader. What are the things, what are the big rocks that you're going to put in first? And so I think that for me as a leader, and probably at any size district, you have to decide, is this a big rock or not? Is it going to be something we fit in if we have time, or is it going to be a priority that we're going to hang on to regardless of what pandemic comes next? And so for me, I had to start though really evaluating myself and my own beliefs about things, and really talking to people who've experienced it to help me make sure I'm not chasing the wrong rabbits.
Yeah, thank you. Ms. Ellis, how's Grand Prairie been engaging in this work?
Well, and I want to start by saying, Dr. Stone, that presentation at TASA has been one of the absolute best things I've ever seen. And I want to say to the group, it should be required viewing for anyone who aspires to be a leader. It's like being in a movie that you never have to look at your watch. I mean, every word that she said, it's like things that you can relate to and things that you should relate to. And so that has helped me a whole lot. And again, I think it should be required viewing for any leader. But the other part is beginning systemic even with our board of trustees, the governing body. Number one, you have to acknowledge that it exists, that racism exists. And the other thing that you have to do is make a commitment to move forward to educate, because people are going to have cultural bias. It is real. You have to acknowledge that. And so a couple of things that we've done in Grand Prairie to address that. Number one, beginning with the leadership from our board of trustees. The other thing is that out of that came our committee, our Equity, Justice, and Inclusion Task Force. The other thing that we did is we partnered with Hanover Research and did an extensive survey. We wanted to hear from our students. We wanted to hear from our staff. We wanted to hear from our parents, and acknowledging the things that you are suspicious of, but you've got to hear it from the people to recognize this is the data that shows these are real problems, and these are real problems that have to be addressed. So those are the two specific things, is just moving forward, educating ourselves and educating our staff, and acknowledging that, and then being a model of what the actions that I take, the hirings that I do, those sort of things that make us more diverse and more rich because of it.
Great, thank you so much. I've received a few questions from our audience. And first one is from, I believe, Christine. This is a great question. She wants to know if priorities for your district and your teams have shifted since the beginning of the pandemic and the current racial reckoning in our country and our world. And so we kind of heard from Dr. Stone about how they held the twin bricks. Any other priorities change in your school districts as a result of working through 2020?
I wouldn't say that it was a priority change, but I would tell you that when we are accustomed to thinking about student outcomes and the things that impact that, something that did become first and foremost is, number one, how do we keep people safe? How do we keep things secure so that people are comfortable with moving forward with the academics of the district?
And one thing we heard last month when we talked about just to safety and security directors and folks engaged in that work, like assistant principals, that they did mention that the focus on vestibules and kind of all those security plans, they did kind of maybe bump to the side a little. A lot of that work had been done, and there's still work they're continuing to do, but it seemed to fall second behind feeding students and making sure access, technology and access was available. But I don't know if your districts experience the same kind of changes.
One of the things that I was going to say that I probably I've never necessarily had to prove before, like I have ever, was that it is a big role and responsibility for me to also keep my staff safe. We spend so much time, it's an expectation that we are working on, we're always, number one priority, we all say it, is student safety. Student safety. And so that's the expectation. I mean, that's what but in this case, in this last year, I have been surprised at the amount of time that I have had to defend a lot of the decisions for staff safety, especially in terms of parents that, they don't want their kids to wear masks, or they wanted their kids to be back full-time, and not understanding the feelings of the staff that, a lot of other states across the country, they're not even back in school. They're not offering face-to-face school. And so much of that has to do with the fact that teachers unions, they have unions in other states, and they have said their teachers are not going back to school. Well, we were told at the 1st of September that our teachers would go back to school if we were to get funded for our operation. And so we had to say to our teachers, you're essential workers, you have to come. This is a face-to-face business that we're in. But with that came, from me as a leader, having a real empathy for the fear of our staff. And that was, and there were other cases all throughout the year, like whenever the vaccine priority list came out and teachers weren't on it. I mean, that was very difficult. And I became a real vocal advocate across the state that the teachers need to be on the next list. They should have been on the first if they're essential workers. We have had so many family members staff members who have experienced loss of parents and family members. This is real. And so how could we not protect those who are expected to be face-to-face? And so that's for me has been something that I have spent more time than I ever have before, just convincing the community, constituents, and parents that the safety and lives of teachers matter equally. I mean, that for me really sticks out as something that I've really had to be involved in this year.
Wow. Yeah. We've got just 4 minutes left. Let's finish with some wins. What have been some amazing things that you've witnessed amongst your districts in the last year?
I think it's already been mentioned. I'll just hit on it quickly. It's the collaboration with my peers. Linda and I, Dr. Ellis and I, we're both in Dallas County, and so we're on calls every week. We're on text messages with each other, big groups of people, really relying on each other to make sure that if we're going to come out with some kind of decision, it's not going to undermine what someone else is doing. And I think that has been, and then just the collaborative spirit of solving all of this together has been a real win, I think, for our profession.
Great, thank you. Ms. Ellis?
I will tell you that for all of the tragedy through this, and in Grand Prairie, we lost 3 teachers. It has been, the grief and the fear has been real, but I've got to tell you, there are many processes that we were forced to put in place that will make us better moving forward. I've often said that when I was in teaching and learning, there was a lady who was a math strategist, and I often thought if I had learned math from her, I would be a mathematician. And so one of the things that we've learned is that we can share bigger, we can provide better training, we've been forced to make some changes that will make us and make education better as a whole.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what professional development will look like once we refine, but the shorter, short bursts of PD and then using that opportunity for distance learning and then following through on that is an exciting opportunity for sure. Let's see, Dr. Thompson.
So I think it's evident just in listening to my colleagues that a lot of times the mantle of leadership, especially in this past year, has been really talked about as a weight. There's a weight to this job as you step across the desk and you become now responsible for not only your own mess ups, but the mess ups of everyone else, and not only the mess ups, but the welfare of everyone else. And, everybody who sees the world like this, but there's a genuine concern for the safety of teachers and students and bus drivers and custodians and keeping your buildings safe, but also protecting the energy grid, whatever it is. There's no clear answers. And this year is, again, whatever modicum of control I thought I had over anything has been kind of shot. And so I think that this is a hard path that you're choosing, and you're choosing it because you're the kind of people who see the ability to step up or to step down, to be that foundational support, because you got strong shoulders. You're going to need them. And you're also going to need, to second what both my colleagues said, you're going to need your friends also. And the thing that I would say is the biggest win out of this year, and I've seen it at the superintendent colleague level, as we've talked about, but I've seen it with teachers in the classroom. I've seen it amongst kids. I think this year has, and I don't know if this is the right way to say it, but it's normalized not being okay. Their social and emotional needs. We've got kids and teachers and leaders who really have experienced trauma, no doubt. And I think that there were a lot of those who had experienced trauma before, and maybe some of us who hadn't experienced it as much, maybe we're not as empathetic to that. But I think it's valuable for us in education, and especially amongst leaders. We don't always do it publicly, but to have people that you can go to and say, hey, today was not a good day. And for that to be okay, and for us to recognize that in the weariness of the eyes of of our principals and teachers and kids, and to say, hey, we've got to make sure we're taking care of that. And as we move hopefully into a post-COVID world, you know, we've all acknowledged we're not going back. There's, you know, new normal, whatever you want to call it. There's still going to continue to be crisis and trauma. This bubble is going to last for a long time, and there's going to be something else that comes along. And so I think we've got to hang on to the ability to be vulnerable with each other and also to be supportive of each other. And you guys, as you come into the leadership world, have got to develop that network of leaders that are going to enter the profession at the same time you do, and those that are a little further down the road who can share their experience back with you, because we're really all in the same boat together, even though we're in different school districts.
Yeah. Well, we could easily continue discussing this for hours, but we are about out of time for this session. I'd like to thank our panelists again for their time. I'd also like to thank Marilee Ludwig, Colin Yaxel, Tatiana Kruchkina for their efforts in facilitating our conversation. Don't forget that the recording for this session will be available for access through the College of Education's YouTube site, and our next panel series will begin in September 2021. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.